Before we start today's show, I have some exciting news to share. The 10th anniversary edition of the novel I wrote, The Sound of Violet, is now available wherever you buy books. It's a story about a man who thinks he found his soulmate, but his autism keeps him from realizing she's being trafficked. I created this new version to deepen the characters and the emotional experience, and it's been getting terrific reviews. Kirkus Reviews calls it a heartwarming love story with standout characters that readers won't forget. The Book Life Prize says, the prose has the sweet, forward-moving cadence of a great romantic comedy, and readers will swoon. The Sound of Violet 10th Anniversary Edition was named one of the best 100 books of the year by Shelf Unbound magazine, and the novel ranked on Amazon's bestseller list for romantic adaptations. It's official, I'm a best-selling author. You can check it out and find out more at thesoundofviolet.com. Now on to the show. Welcome to the Navigating Hollywood podcast. My name is Alan Wolf, and I'm a filmmaker and an author. Navigating Hollywood helps media professionals build holistic, creative, and spiritual lives through this podcast and discussion groups at the major studios. If you work in entertainment, visit navigatinghollywood.org to discover how you can get involved. Today, we're joined by animation legend Mark Henn, the man behind some of Disney's most beloved characters. Over his 43-year career at Walt Disney Animation Studios, Mark became known as the Princess Guy for his masterful work bringing Disney's most iconic heroines to life, such as Ariel from The Little Mermaid, Belle from Beauty and the Beast, Jasmine from Aladdin, young Simba from The Lion King, Mulan from Mulan, and Princess Tiana from The Princess and the Frog. His artistry helped define the Disney Renaissance era and continues to inspire animators worldwide. In 2013, Mark received the prestigious Winsor McKay Award for Lifetime Achievement in Animation, and in 2024, he was honored as a Disney legend. Mark retired in 2023, but continues to be celebrated as one of the most influential character animators of his generation. Welcome, Mark.
Wow. Thank you, Alan. Thanks for having me.
Now, in England, when you're knighted, you have to start calling someone sir, whatever their name is. When you become a Disney legend, is there some way people have to address you now?
They just say, hey, you.
Okay. You decided to become an animator at age 7 after watching a reissue of Cinderella. What about that experience sparked that idea?
Cinderella was one of the first feature films that I remember seeing as a small boy. It was just magic in my mind. The other film that I saw around the same time was The Reluctant Dragon, which was the film that Walt created around the 1940s to pull the curtain back to show people how animated films were done at the studio. And he's looking over Ward Kimball's shoulder as he's finishing a drawing of Goofy. And Ward says, you want to see it move? And he takes this one drawing, puts it on a stack of drawings, starts flipping it, and Goofy came to life. And I was hooked. So a combination of those two films kind of laid the groundwork for my decision as a small boy growing up in Ohio to tell people when they'd ask, so what do you want to be when you grow up? I'd say, I'd like to be a Disney animator. And they'd say, that's nice.
Well, you faced multiple rejections from Disney before getting in. And one rejection letter said you didn't have what it took to travel the narrow roads that their animators travel. Did that fuel your determination?
That was the third and final official rejection from the studio. The first portfolio I sent in, they expressed an interest. They saw something in my work, told me what I needed to do, where I needed to improve on. I sent a second portfolio in thinking I had met those improvements. But they said, no, you just need to stay in school and become a better artist. So by the time I got to that third portfolio, I thought for sure I had nailed everything that they wanted me to do. And then that was their response. And it just kind of was like, ah. I looked into two art schools. I told myself I need to get a better art education. So I applied to a school in Colorado, the Rocky Mountain School of Art, it was called. Found it in the back advertisement in the back of an art magazine. But a friend of mine in high school had given me the catalog, California Institute of the Arts here in Valencia. After that third rejection, basically with the same portfolio that the studio had rejected, redid a few little things, and I sent that off to both schools, the Rocky Mountain School in Colorado and CalArts here in California, and then just sat back and waited to get hopefully a positive response. And when I got the letter from CalArts, I didn't get any further than the first word, which said congratulations. So I was like, yay. So got on a TWA flight direct from Dayton, Ohio to Los Angeles, and kind of had my Mary Tyler Moore moment as I arrived in Los Angeles in a downpour of rain. And everybody on the flyaway bus, as I was riding up, they were all grumpy and grouching and, the traffic and the rain. And I was just like, wow, I'm in Los Angeles.
At CalArts, you studied alongside future legends like John Lasseter and Joe Ranft. What was that creative environment like?
The class I was in was the fourth year of the character program. So John Lasseter was in his fourth year, my first year, but Joe Ranft and we were in the same class. So we were the largest class that they had at that point. There was about maybe 30 of us. It was neat to be in a room with a bunch of people that were very like-minded in terms of their goals and their dreams of working in the industry, but specifically, I think working for Disney, we all had these amazing teachers, which were all former Disney animators, Disney artists. Jack Hanna was the department head, and he was, of course, known for being the Donald Duck short director. We were all like sponges. Anything and everything we could learn from them was kind of the agenda for our class. A lot of what we had to do was kind of self-learning, and they kind of just guided us along the way, particularly in the animation class. That was kind of trial and error on our own and, learning from others.
Now, Disney dubbed you as the princess guy. How do you feel about that title?
It's meant very respectfully, very lovingly, and I embrace it. It's just kind of what's, my lot in terms of, being cast on characters. People have asked over the years why I had done so many, and I'm thinking, well, when you really look back over my career, most of the characters that I've done are the leading characters. So I've done a lot of dogs and cats, like in Oliver and Company and The Great Mouse, the Detective. I handled a lot of the lead characters. And I think over time, I've learned that I think they have arguably the most interesting journey, the heroes and the leading characters. We just happen to have told a lot of stories that were chosen to be told that involve a leading lady. And for whatever reason, the directors on those films have felt my approach, my sensibilities have worked best for them. But like on Mulan, I started with animating Mulan, but then the directors came to me and said, her father is equally important to this relationship, and we'd like you to also animate him. So I also animated her father because that relationship was kind of the emotional heart and soul of the movie Mulan. This is kind of the way things have fallen into my lap as far as being cast.
What do you think makes a compelling Disney princess from an animator's perspective?
Well, for me, one of the greatest challenges is coming up with something unique for each one, because I did Ariel, Belle, and Jasmine, one right after the other, right after the other. So the challenge with any of the characters, regardless if it's a princess or a lion or a mouse, what is that character? What is that unique personality? And how do I, through my animation, make them stand out as unique? How do I make Belle different than Ariel? How do I make Jasmine different than Belle? And those are the great challenges for the animators, because it's an acting job being an animator. It's just, you don't see me on stage, you see what I'm able to draw on the screen instead.
What does that process look like for developing those character traits?
It varies a little bit from production to production. For example, we had kind of a character design retreat on Princess and the Frog. And all we did that whole weekend was sit in a room and we took each character one by one and everybody contributed ideas, sketches. And again, the director's going, I like this, I don't like this, I like this. So it was a really amazing weekend, something we hadn't done on other films, but it was the same idea of just, kind of focusing, in this case, just kind of focusing on, character design specifically. So regardless of who I was cast to do Tiana, of course, but we all chipped in and looked at, drawings of Facilier and Louis the Alligator, and it was a really fun weekend that we spent developing that. But at a certain point, the directors and the producers have to say, that's it. So, for example, on Lion King, we had, a lot of experts come in to look at a lot of footage of lions and things. I was just doing drawing after drawing after drawing, and I flew out here for a meeting, and I, had a board of my Simba sketches up, and Jeffrey Katzenberg at some point, that was part of the agenda for the meeting. He just went through and was like, okay, yeah, all right. And Don Hahn turned to me and said, I think you just got Simba approved. So I was like, arguably one of the fastest design approvals I think I'd ever experienced. That's basically the way it happens. So it's very collaborative. You work with a lot of incredibly talented people. You do a lot of research on your own. They've done a lot of research of their own, and you take what they've learned, you do the research yourself, take what you've learned, and you just, it's kind of, you put it all together and put together a design and hopefully create a memorable character.
You modeled Jasmine after your sister, Beth. Can you tell us about using other personal references in your work and how that impacted the character's development?
Jasmine was number 3 in a row for me. I kind of hit an artist block in terms of just finding the look of Jasmine. Originally, I was asked to animate Aladdin's mother. Usually a pregnant pause there because you kind of go, I don't remember Aladdin's mother in the movie. Well, that's right, because we had what's very common in our process, a major story meltdown. Black Monday, in fact, this not working. And Jeffrey said, no, put the brakes on, said, we got to rethink this.
And how finished was the film at that point?
Oh, just story reels.
I see. Okay.
If you're going to make changes like that, that's the best time to do it. It's a little painful, but it's important. So it was Aladdin's mother was out, and Jasmine's role got bigger as a result. And so the directors came to me and said, we'd like you to take over working on Jasmine. So it was great. Visually, I was having a hard time coming up with her look. And at that point, Eric Goldberg had joined the studio. And of course, he was impressing everybody with his Al Hirschfeld approach, with the way he handled the genie. So there was that influence going on. I just was having a hard time getting a hook on how Jasmine looked. But eventually, I reached into my hip pocket, pulled out my wallet, and I got thinking, I was like, okay, well, Jasmine's kind of this age. And I just got thinking about it, and I pulled out the picture of my sister's high school graduation photo that I had in my wallet, Beth. And I was just like, there's something there. And I started using that then. That kind of got me over that artistic hump. It worked really well. And after the movie came out, she's an excellent seamstress. So she made herself a Jasmine costume and a wig and laid down on some pillows and had her picture taken. And it was just like Jasmine in the flesh.
Oh,
I mean,
my gosh.
Wow. As good, if not better than, some of the part characters. She is Jasmine. So, but in terms of other, you accumulate a body of memories as you grow up. And, you and I both grew up in the Ohio area, pretty normal Americana, type of an upbringing. But there's a lot of experiences that I'm sure you have and as you bring to your work that I've go back to with my own work. One example, I swam a lot when I was a kid. I was on a swim team from like age 8 up through about my sophomore year in high school. I was a competitive swimmer, so I spent a lot of time in a pool. And on Mulan, we had that great sequence where she sneaks off to get a bath, wash away the grit and grime of her training that particular day. So she goes off. She was into the water. I remember experiencing this. I remember seeing this countless times when I was in a pool. That's what I call the double dip, where you would jump in, you'd come out of the water, you'd flip your hair up, the hair would go in the crazy thing, and then you do what I call the double dip, where you just gently roll back, and just, brush the hair out of your face. I saw that so many times and experienced that when I was in a pool. I said, well, I got to do that. Well, the director, he didn't understand it. He was like, I don't get this. And I said, trust me, it's right. And I kind of had to put my foot down, and he wanted me to change it. And I kind of had to say no. So it stayed in. It's something that you start digging through the files of your memories, you growing up, and things you experience, things you see. And that was one in particular that I remember very vividly because I lived it for so many years.
There's been an ongoing discussion about body representation in Disney films, with critics pointing out that many Disney princesses have unrealistic proportions, like extremely small waists, large eyes, idealized features. As the animator responsible for bringing those characters to life, how do you balance creating appealing character designs with being mindful of the body image messages being sent to young audiences?
Yes, I've heard that. And frankly, I don't think about it. I mean, I think about what's the most appealing design for that particular character. Our society is a little schizo right now with, if you're considered heavy or overweight, they kind of encourage people to go on a diet and, be healthy. And yet, on the other hand, they're saying, be who you are, and if you're on the heavier side, be your healthiest heaviness. I mean, there's kind of so you can't win in one sense. So decisions just have to be made in terms of just what we at the studio and the directors and everybody involved, we just feel is the most appealing design for these characters. I don't let it, weigh on me too heavily. I've heard those arguments. Like I said, it's kind of, you can't win. You're never going to please everybody. So we have to basically please ourselves as filmmakers first. And hopefully that appeals to, most of our people in our audience. You're not going to please everybody.
Do you find that you have to kind of put those criticisms aside to have more freedom and when you're developing something?
In one sense, we're making the film for ourselves first. We make films that we find appealing, that we would, go see. Because if you start listening to all the outside voices and, telling you this, telling you that, you're never going to get anything done. There's kind of a quality to filmmaking that, the buck stops with the directors and the producer. They may have the final decision. And, we're very sensitive to doing our research, doing our due diligence, like with Moana, Pocahontas. I mean, there was a lot of effort, a lot of research to partner with Native Americans on Pocahontas to understand, culturally what's right. So we weren't doing things that were just stereotypical. Same with the research from Moana. The director spent, rough job off to the South Pacific to do a lot of research, but it was all intended to make sure that not only how the characters looked, but, how they acted and worlds that we were creating were correct as far as that we can make them with regards to the needs of the story.
Your directorial debut, John Henry, won awards, but had a troubled release due to Disney's concerns about potentially offending audiences. Can you talk about that experience and what the film meant to you?
Goes under the category of it was a passion project. The story of John Henry, the song and all that was something I grew up with. And it just was one of my favorite tall tales and legends. I had spent a lot of time having conversations with myself to say, well, if you're going to do this, you got to do it. You just have to kind of do it. I just started developing it. I wrote an outline. I started doing some boards. And then I slowly incorporated people. Like I had a couple of friends in Florida that I knew were interested in story and writing. After I wrote an outline, I approached them with it, and they were eager and excited. So they came on board, and it just very gradually started to grow. I worked with a gal in development in Burbank, and I told her, I said, I really don't want anybody to know about this yet. And she said, fine, I'll gladly help you. But she said, when you get to a point where I feel like it's ready to pitch to Peter and Tom, will you trust me? And I'm like, yes, absolutely. So that's what we did. I don't know how many months we spent, developing, writing, boarding. And then we got to a point where she said, I think it's time to pitch it to Peter and Tom. So I was out here for a business trip, pitched it to Peter and Tom, and they both loved it. They just loved it. And there was nothing like having the might of the studio behind you when you've got a project like that, and they're on board with it. And things really just took off after that. It was one of the best experiences I had working at the studio. It was just a great experience. Unfortunately, for reasons still unknown to me, the studio kind of buried it. Nationally, they made February Black History Month. And so somebody at the studio, I still don't know who it was, came up with the idea of doing a short live action film as part of a package to environments. And they put this thing together. It was just like a 2 or 3 minute little film. And it ends with a shot of John Henry's hammer in a display case. And it was like, in honor of Black History Month, Walt Disney Company is proud to present John Henry. And that's the way it was going to be released into theaters, hopefully. And it was beautiful. It was really a very lovely, very well done. And it disappeared after that. It never happened. And I was only told that whoever was behind the live action film evidently stepped on some toes by, exceeding their pay grade or whatever and doing this. And they just kind of buried it. So we were able to submit John Henry to several film festivals, and it won a couple of awards. But then Disney Education got a hold of it. They kind of created an in-classroom package. It kind of had a second life via the Disney Education wing. And I've had a lot of people, surprisingly, a lot of people have come up to me and said that that's, either theirs or their children's favorite shorts that Disney's ever done. A couple years ago, Disney Animation put together its own shorts collection, just like Pixar had put together a shorts collection and released it on DVD. John Henry was included on that, and they had a lot of us do little intros for each of our shorts.
You witnessed Disney's evolution from the dark period of the early 80s through the Renaissance and then into the modern CG area. What were the most significant changes you observed in storytelling and animation techniques?
The dark days. When I arrived at the studio, there was the dust hadn't settled, because when I came back out to California for my second year at CalArts, the water cooler talk was, did you hear about Don Bluth? And they all left. They quit. He took half of the animators, and that was like, so I started my second year at CalArts knowing that had just recently happened at the studio, which, was a major, major blow. They were in the Fox and the Hound was in production. It kind of, in our own minds, I think, thought, well, maybe there'll be more jobs available since a lot of people left. And so there was some tensions there, and the dust was still kind of settling as, we were trying to kind of find our way. And, we muscled our way through, finishing up the Fox and the Hound. And after that, the big project that Frank and Ollie had been involved with initially and milled was the Black Cauldron. You just, kind of put your head down and did the job you were asked to do. Thankfully, for me personally, the bright light in those dark days, if you want to call it that, was Bernie Mattinson. It started at the studio in 1953. So he was kind of that intermediate generation between the 9 old men and then my generation. He was kind of that filler, but he was kind of by himself. But he was very much a supporter of our generation, and he was willing to work with us. And he came up with, because he had, I think he had butted heads with some of the other folks as well, but he came up with the Mickey's Christmas Carol idea. And that was essentially Bernie and a whole group of younger artists. So Bernie pulled me out. I had done a Mickey animation test to get a promotion, and he was part of the review board, and he saw it and he liked it. He approached me and said, I think you could handle Mickey Mouse. So my first animation assignment as an animator for the studio was animating Mickey Mouse, which was incredibly special. Bernie was very instrumental in working and developing a lot of our generation, because after Mickey's Christmas Carol, he and Ron and John, who had been kind of stuck in story purgatory on Black Cauldron until they were, removed, he took them on and they started developing The Great Mouse Detective Basil of Baker Street. From that point on, things started to slowly turn around. Eventually, the technology, the major change, of course, was after Home on the Range, which was supposed to be our last hand-drawn film. You could kind of see the writing on the wall as Pixar was becoming those types of movies. Computer films were becoming the it movies. So the writing was on the wall that we were going to have to do that. But the neat thing is that's just a tool change. The philosophy of the storytelling, character development, all of those kind of things hasn't really changed, because what's really fun is as you talk to people at the studio, more often than not, you hear the same story, different variations, but it's the same story, how they grew up and they wanted to come and work for Disney and be a Disney animator or a layout artist or whatever the job is. There was a dream to work for Disney. And I think that's been key to, continuing the success and the legacy that we've had.
Disney Animation has faced some recent box office challenges with films like Strange World and Wish not performing as expected, while earlier successes like Frozen and Moana were massive hits. From your perspective, as someone who helped define Disney's golden age of animation, what do you think makes the difference between an animated film that resonates with audiences and one that doesn't?
You ask these simple questions. If I had the answer, every film would be wonderful. For us at the studio, it's always been about story and character. And hopefully you create a story that is compelling, but then it's populated with characters that people can identify with, that people can say, I know what that character's thinking, and they can kind of get in the vehicle with them and kind of go on the same journey. That's still always the goal. And to try to find a compelling story and populate it with, appealing, compelling characters as well that audiences can identify with. When you have that, that seems to be part of the formulas when the films are bigger successes. And it could be any number of things. And there's been several cases that I've known of where I get fan letters, from people that talk about how much these characters mean to them or have gotten them through a hard time, a difficult time. There was a famous letter. It was actually written to Michael Eisner, I believe, after Beauty and the Beast. And it was from a mother on behalf of her daughter who said that, the little girl was having doubts about herself, low esteem, because she was a brunette and all of her friends and the popular girls were blondes. No offense to blondes. But in her mind, she felt her esteem was very low because she wasn't a blonde, blue-eyed girl. And then Beauty and the Beast came out, and Belle is a brunette. And the mother wrote how that just 180 her daughter's self-esteem, and it gave her something to hang on to. And I personally have had several letters after Princess and the Frog from mothers saying, I threw a birthday party for my little girl. These are African-American mothers saying how much it meant for her daughter to see a Disney princess that looked like her.
Wow.
That kind of gets me all choked up even now, but you never know what it's going to take. It's a Disney princess or if it's Simba. We hear a lot of stories and letters, fan letters, explaining, what these films mean to us. And then you go to D23 convention and you meet the public, your fans in person. And for me, I always hear one of the nicest compliments is, you animated my childhood. And, you and I grew up, Frank and Ollie animated my childhood, and they animated the things that inspired me and wanted me to do this. And now I'm hearing that and I feel very old. But I don't want to say it's a gamble, but, we have no way of knowing until the films come out, because usually it's a director, story person. Somebody comes in and says, I've got an idea for a film and this is my vision for it. And if the studio agrees, then they get the opportunity to execute that vision. And sometimes it works fabulous and sometimes it's not as successful, but that's just kind of the way way it goes. There's a lot of cases where over time, what was initially not successful, Pinocchio was not successful. Fantasia, there were a lot of, quote, flops early in the Disney films for a variety of different reasons. I mean, the war was going on and, they lost their European market and things like that. But a lot of considered flops then are now considered classics and masterpieces. So, and sometimes, it's just a matter of time and people get a second look at it and go, it's actually pretty good.
You mentioned D23. At the 2024 D23 event, all 5 voice actresses of your Disney princesses appeared together to honor you. What was that like, seeing the impact of your work celebrated?
I still pinch myself that it's been a year ago now. We've exceeded a year.
Mark Henn is a brilliant animator with overflowing kindness and loyalty. He doesn't just design characters on paper. He creates images infused with passion, vulnerability, and authenticity that connect with people for generations.
I've stayed in touch. We run into each other, a couple of them every so often, Jody and Paige. I hadn't seen Linda for a while. I was blown away. The same thing happened when I received my Winsor McKay Award. Ming Na Wen introduced me, and I, again, had the same impact because I didn't know she was going to do that. It meant so much to me for her to take the time to do that, and then to see her part of this group as well, to be there on stage with me, thankfully, because I was so nervous. I was very nervous, and they've meant so much. And, these voice actors contribute a lot to the characters. It's a part of them. It's a part of me, the story artist, the director. It's very collaborative in how these characters come to life. It meant a lot. It's hard to express, but it meant a lot to me to have them there.
What has your spiritual journey looked like?
Well, I was thinking about this morning. I was at a men's breakfast at church on Saturday, and the speaker made a quote. Forget who he quoted, but it was a good quote because he said he stole it from somebody because he thought it was good. How that God connects the dots, but that God also makes the dots. He said that was really stuck with him, and he shared that with us at the men's breakfast. And I was like, yeah, that really makes a lot of sense. And at this point in my life and my career, and I look back first at, how God connected the dots. But then I realized, how God made those dots along the way. Everything going back to, what initially got me excited about Disney animation, wanting to be an animator, that process. I was saved when I was in college. I got a phone call from, to this day, I have no idea what my contact was with them, but it was a Campus Crusade. A young man called me and said, I'd like to come over and talk with you. Could I do that? I said, sure. But as I look back and kind of try to analyze it a little bit, I realized at that point in my life, first year in college, I was away from home and thinking about how I was going to, run my life and, what I thought would be best and which included still working for Disney, but, it was all about my way of doing things. And then I get this phone call. I grew up going to church. It was just a normal part of, growing up in southwestern Ohio, middle-class America. I didn't fully understand, what it was, what Christ's sacrifice meant, and God's forgiveness was all about. So this person walked me through that. That's when God opened my eyes and my heart. There's an image, there's a bridge, God over here, man over here, and, Christ is that bridge to, restore that relationship. That was for the first time explained to me, and in the light bulb, it clicked in my head. I accepted Christ. It's been a good journey. I can't say that it hasn't been without bumps along the way. Nobody can, but God has been very faithful. And when I look back at those dots that were connected and then think about the fact that God made those dots, it just kind of blows me away to think just how that all came together. And I'm thinking, gosh, how did I get through that without him? And even if I didn't, always acknowledge that it was him behind the scenes, it was. Said I've learned a lot. I've made mistakes, but God has always been very faithful. And, like I said, 43 years of doing what I've loved to do, what I dreamt of doing as a small boy. To start with, it's certainly God connecting dots and creating those dots along the way.
How has your faith impacted what you do?
First and foremost is doing whatever you do with excellence. There's the verse about whatever you do in word or deed, doing it unto the Lord. And I think, that's always been kind of foundational for me. It's a level of excellence. It's a standard that I think God expects of his people that love him to do their very best at whatever they're asked to do, whatever you're asked to do, whatever your profession is, just do it heartily as to the Lord. And that's always been, foundational for me, first and foremost. And I always find myself saying, asking the Lord to let me, just represent him well as much as I possibly can. That's kind of where it all begins, having the opportunity to be a Disney animator, being the best animator I could possibly be. I said, it isn't a competition. I don't do this alone. There's, hundreds of incredibly talented artists that I've worked with along the way. I've been in a more of a leadership position than a lot, just wanting to make sure the work that I do is excellent, that there's a level of excellence that I think God expects of us.
How do you stay spiritually healthy while in the role that you've had for so long?
I used to try to start each day by, reading a verse or two in the Word, pray all the time. I mean, there's no set time, and if you're walking across to the lot, you can be praying. I mean, that's one of my favorite things that I kind of miss in retirement is taking a lot walk, walking around the lot and just talking with the Lord and, expressing my gratitude for, having the opportunity to work there. I had the opportunity to also work with a lot of fellow Christians, and we've had a variety of Bible studies over the years. Just knowing that you're not alone, that there are other believers at the studio that you can talk to and share with. It's about, just living a life that, honoring to the Lord as far as I'm concerned.
At the end of your life, what kind of legacy would you like to leave behind?
Well, I often think of the title King David had, that he was a man after God's own heart. And I suppose in one respects, I'd like to have that as part of my legacy, a good father, a good artist, and a man who loved God as much as I possibly can. I think that's as much as any of us can expect. All the awards and accolades are all going to burn up. And, it's not going to be, it's going to go somewhere, but it's not going to go with you to heaven, that's for sure. But if it represents a level of excellence, doing a job well done, being thankful that God has allowed me to have this career and people knowing about that, I think that's part of the legacy as well.
Well, thank you so much for being my guest and sharing your incredible stories, Mark.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been fun. I appreciate it.
It's great to have you. If you work in entertainment, check out our courses, groups, and other resources available at navigatinghollywood.org. Please follow us and leave us a review so others can discover this podcast. You can find our other shows, transcripts, links, and more at navigatinghollywood.org. I look forward to being with you next time.